it reminds me the artwork that they show in the mental health first aid class. Every time you go to a new segment, they show a piece of artwork with someone with lived experience, and then in your workbooks you have some information about that piece and what the artist was feeling, and it's that it like connects all in. As soon as I saw that graphic out there in the marketing, I was like, oh, this is perfect. It'll be nice to end it off in May.
It's true. I remember the artwork. Welcome, everyone. So we'll start on time. Welcome to our psychological safety at work. This is a two-part workshop. Our first part is today on February 9th. The second part is March 9th. You had the option to register for both when you did register, but we are going to share the link so you get the option to continue if you wish to do so. I want to take a minute to thank our sponsors for the Bear in Mind program. This is a journey that we started because of demand by our members and the employees. We started this journey back in October, and we will continue till Mental Health Awareness Month in May. We have monthly webinars, and we have mental health first aid training provided by our speaker today, Shannon Prescott. So we want to thank the people that made this possible. Kennebunk Savings, Coke of Northeast, Prime Buckles. We also want to thank our partners for the content, Full Spectrum Wellness, the Richards Group, and as you saw that image of the bear from Rosemary Conroy, NAMI New Hampshire, Dartmouth Health, and the Brown Center. We have a lot of partners in this, and we thank them all. I want to introduce you to our speakers today. Both our speakers are from the Richards Group, a big partner for this campaign. Shannon Prescott is the Director of Risk Control of the Richards Group, serving business insurance clients with employment practice, compliance, safety program evaluation, and implementation, helping them achieve compliance with OSHA, DOT, and DOL regulations. In addition, she provides first aid, CPR courses, and mental health first aid courses, which she is actually providing for us in May, so you can sign up for that as well. Their bios are extensive, so I will include a link to an online bio that you can read, so excuse the shortened bios. Ross Gibson is a leadership and organizational development consultant facilitator. As the Chief of Operations for Employee Benefits Practice at the Richards Group, Ross works with organizations to help develop positive leadership growth. Ross also leads several teams within the employee benefits practice at the Richards Group. Prior to working as a consultant, Ross was a Senior Vice President of Global Human Resources at World Learning based in Brattleboro, Vermont, and Washington, D.C. Ross has held several senior positions, including Vice President of the organization. I will include the rest of the bios and hand it over right now to our speakers.
Thanks, Ina.
Bear with me while I get our screen shared. Oh, good.
Awesome.
So thank you, Zena. I think we don't need to give ourselves more introductions whatsoever. So I'm gonna.
We just look older in those other pictures, that's all.
There's lots of pictures of us. We have so many selfies.
So we hope that everyone was able to access the workbook for this session. Zena sent it out as a link. I think you said it's on the Google Drive, and also you're going to drop it in the chat. So it's a 30-page workbook that is applicable both for today's session as well as part 2, which is on March 9th, also a Thursday. And so we hope, you know, this whets your appetite to come back and join us again, but the workbook has the material for both workshops in it. A quick note, you see the numbers on the bottom of the current screen. Those are page numbers in the workbook. So if we're on a particular page on the screen, you'll see the page number. Pages 21 through 24 are a couple of really nice self-assessment tools that Shannon and I have provided for you. pages 25 through 28 is an extensive list of quotes. So if you see a quote flash up on the screen, don't worry, it's in your workbook. But there's 3 pages just from today's featured book, which is The Fearless Organization by Dr. Amy Edmondson. And speaking of books, we have a whole bunch of book recommendations on page 29. Shannon and I are lifelong learners and continuing to try to develop resources for ourselves and our teams and our clients. And then there's space on page 30 for the 6 big takeaways, which we're going to cover next time. So a couple of goals that we have, I think 3 goals in particular. One is we really need to get into a definition of what does psychological safety mean. The second one is to learn why it's critically important. And number 3, which is what we're going to cover next time, is the 6 critical leadership skills that you can use to move the needle on the climate wherever you work. And what we have found is that this is helpful not just for you personally, but also if you're in a role where you have influence over others or with others, which is really the definition of leadership. You can use these to help influence and move the needle with others that you work with, because psychological safety only works in the context of teams and an overall organizational climate. This is all about tools. And we like to use the toolkit as a metaphor for what you bring to work and what you use at work. And if you attend both these sessions, you're going to walk away with perhaps some new tools that you can use, but more likely some tools that you already have, that you know that you have, but you're able to sharpen and refine a little bit. And some of these are just great reminders, you know, whether we're talking about listening skills or leading by example. These are things that I'm sure you already know, but it's great to put it in this framework and just have an open conversation about it. And I should mention before we dive any farther into it, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon. Please use the chat. I see that Zena put the Google Doc link in there, which is awesome. Please use the chat if you have questions along the way. We'll be monitoring the chat room. We're going to do an exercise in a little bit where I think, Shannon, what do you call it? A chat bomb?
Chat bomb or chat storm, yep. Sometimes it's called.
You know, we have over 30 people on this, so I know it's hard to have a dialogue in a short amount of time, but please do, if you have a question, comment, concern, pop it right in there. We will try to respond as well. So Shannon, why is this so important?
It's hugely important. And that brings us to some of, let's talk about this poster, these kinds of posters, and how we would love to see these things fade out to black and no longer exist anymore. So one of the areas that we're really looking at, you know, when Ross and I do these presentations together, we really come from 2 different areas of an HR department or an organization, where I'm a lot of the times looking at physical safety of employees, where Ross is looking at leadership development and maybe HR practices and employment practice and that kind of thing. And so these posters are actually discouraged by OSHA, and there's a reason for that, and that's because this is a lie. And I've never been into an organization where one of these posters is actually accurate. It can put out a false sense of security, and it also can create an unsafe environment for psychological safety with these, not wanting to break that streak that they perceive that they have going on. But also, when you look specifically at lost time accident on this could mean that people are being forced back into work a little too early as well. There's many organizations that are going to have what we call a shock loss, where there's just inevitably going to be somebody that needs to lose some time in an incident. And when you work in a higher risk industry like construction or manufacturing, or one of those areas where there's lots of moving parts and sharp tools, very likely you're going to experience these things. So when we put those things out there, we're perhaps putting out maybe an unachievable goal and preventing people from coming forward because they don't want to, again, mess up that record. So when we talk about just even base psychological safety, having something as simple as this poster up creates that environment right off the bat that this is what we're focused on, right?
Yeah.
And it's not the prevention methods and focusing on how do we help develop employees.
Yeah, it becomes counterintuitive.
Definitely. So one of my favorite things that I learned from Ross in the very beginning was that there is big in the little. And what this means to me when I hear it and when I'm presenting it is that it can go a long, long way when we do small things for people, little acknowledgments throughout the day or a thank you at the end of the day. And we're going to talk about over these two workshops that we have over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about these little things that other organizations have done that have created big ripples across the organization in a good way. Right? There's always a ripple effect to our actions. And so when we can do little positive things, it makes a big impact on employees in the long run. So Ross, do you want to?
Yeah, well, and I guess you can go right to the next slide, Shannon, thanks. Right. So the warning here is about toxicity in the workplace. And it was great that Shannon explained how she and I come at this from different, work experience background, but it melds so well together. Because in Shannon's world, in the OSHA physical safety world, toxicity, you're looking for toxins in the workplace. I'm looking for toxins in the workplace as well, but they're human toxins. And when there's toxicity in the workplace in the form of people's interactions, it makes the workplace just as dangerous as if we were ignoring all the OSHA rules and not providing a physically safe workplace. So let's dive a little bit further into this. I want to introduce you to Dr. Amy Edmondson. I'm so happy that I came across Dr. Edmondson about 6 or 7 years ago. And this gets directly to what Shannon was just talking about. Dr. Edmondson, who's a researcher and her area of focus really is in how teams work together. That's her initial focus. Years ago, as a young researcher at Harvard Business School, she was interested in figuring out the difference between great teams and weak teams. And so she had this premise that she wanted to prove, as researchers like to prove hypotheses. So her hypothesis was great teams have fewer safety incidents than weak teams. So she wanted to test this, working primarily in healthcare, being in the Boston area, having access to a lot of teaching hospitals. And what she found was the exact opposite, that the great team had a higher number of reported safety incidents. I threw the word reported in there because what she found was on great teams, they felt comfortable and felt responsible about reporting whenever there was a safety incident. And on the weak teams, they covered them up. They hid them. They didn't talk about them. They were afraid to bring them forward. And this was the big aha of her entire career. It's like, why is that? Why are we seeing the exact opposite of what you would expect? So if we can keep moving forward here. So let's get to the definition. And you have the definitions at the top of the page on page 3 in your workbook. Psychological safety, that's directly from the book. The belief that the work environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, and it's where we feel comfortable speaking up, being heard. I've got this crazy idea, and I know if I bring it up, it'll be received, even if it's just totally off the wall. The opposite of this is, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to be quiet. I don't want to take the risk. I got the eye roll last time, or the sneer, or the snarky comment. So I'm going to keep entirely quiet. And when we don't allow people to be their full selves at work, we're impacting our organization. And this drops right to the bottom line in so many different ways. So it's a critically important thing to be aware of. And by the way, the book is fantastic. So here's our definition, just going a little bit deeper. Some people don't feel safe, as it says on here, despite our best efforts. And we can see it. I'm going to come back to that momentarily. Creating a working space that's more psychologically safe is at the core of diversity, of a diverse workforce, because you want all those differing, diverse ideas, thoughts, backgrounds being brought forward so that we can be the greatest organizations we can possibly be. And so there's a nice graphic at the bottom of the screen here. I love the second box where it says micro dismissive comments, right? From people whose background might not appreciate somebody on a diverse background, however you identify that way. And it's that micro in there that I think is something that's critically important. Shannon, we could probably do another hour just talking about microaggressions and micro dismissive comments, right? We see it all the time.
Yeah, all the time. And a lot of this is also, it's coming from the supervisor to the employee. And so if you're up at a higher leadership level, you may not even know that this is occurring.
Yeah.
And the supervisor might not even realize that what they're doing is creating that unsafe environment. And the more that person feels uncomfortable approaching them or dismissed, then Ross is right. They will stop talking. And that's one of our most dangerous situations, is when our most vocal employees become quiet.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's an interesting thing she talks about in the book, and it's something she observed as a researcher. She said we all go through a very, very rapid decision-making process. So picture sitting in a meeting, and you have something that you want to say. We go through, our brains are so quick. We go through this almost binary, should I speak up, should I not speak up, so fast. And oftentimes the decision is, I'm not going to speak up because I know what the outcome is going to be, which is I didn't take the risk. I'm right where I was, but I didn't get shot down, put upon, etc. Versus if I do speak up, I'm taking a risk. We want to create an environment where people want to take that risk, are willing to take that risk. And that it's that very quick decision that it's almost like an on-off switch. Very, very interesting. So here's a brief video. I hope you can hear this. We tested it, so it should be good. So this is just a couple of minutes with Dr. Edmondson. What I would, and I know this is a very quick webinar, these 2 one-hour webinars. So we're trying to provide some resources. Not only is the book fabulous, but there's a lot of great content on the web. Dr. Edmondson is a great poster on LinkedIn, so I would encourage following her. You can find a lot of good videos. But here's a brief video of Dr. Edmondson to give you a really good taste of the work that she's doing.
There was research last year that was written up in the New York Times at Google saying that Google did a massive 4-year study to find out what differentiated great teams from not so great teams. And bottom line, they found that the biggest differentiator by far of excellent teams at Google and not so good teams was psychological safety. And that was stunning news to me. I mean, it was music to my ears, of course. But the reason why I think that's very important news for people in any organization is that I, at least, had a tendency to think of Google as full of unbelievably smart people, which I think is absolutely the case, but people who wouldn't necessarily have a problem sharing what they're thinking, that there would be just uniformly a high level of confidence that I can say what I'm thinking. But it turns out, no, even at Google, it varied greatly from team to team, and that made all the difference. We live more and more in a knowledge economy. That is, it is the knowledge, the ideas that people have, that people bring, that organizations bring, that really add value in the marketplace. So it stands to reason that we need to hear from people. And yet, the research, the data are overwhelming that many people feel they can't speak up at work. In many companies, it might be as many as half the employees are reporting that it really doesn't feel safe to speak up. That means we're losing enormous value. And so if we aren't hearing from people, we may be missing out on a game-changing idea, that could become part of a new product or a new service. Or we might miss an early warning of a threat in the market that someone saw but felt unable to bring the bad news to their boss. it can be very powerful when a leader apologizes for not having made it safe in the past. When a leader takes responsibility and acknowledges, I can see that there were things that I did that made it difficult for you to come to me. Rather than, I think there's a spontaneous tendency to say, well, why didn't you come to me? Rather than stopping to think, I wonder what I did that made it difficult for you to come to me. Because I will assume that you are well-intentioned, right? I also assume that you're smart. So if it didn't work out, if there wasn't psychological safety there, it's on me. And I think it's always on the leader to go first and to do what he or she can to create psychological safety. The ability for people to come to work and speak up about what they know, what they don't know, what they see, what they're worried about is absolutely mission critical to success in a knowledge economy.
Good stuff, right? So here's the book, my final kind of pitch here, that if you're in a place of influence where you work, I can't recommend enough getting a copy of this book and passing it around. I think it is well worth it. That's a great quote. And again, in your workbooks, we chock full 3 pages full of quotes from the book.
I can just adding a comment on here. This quote gets me every time, thinking back to being a young woman in a brand new field for the first time and sitting in on meetings and being terrified to speak up and say something for fear of being wrong, right? And that wasn't my bosses or anything that was making me feel that way. It was certain colleagues around the table at the time. And when we talk about having somebody like a minority sitting around the table, I was often the only female in the room for the first 3 or 4 years I was working in the insurance industry. So that is a really good representation of why I might not feel psychologically safe to speak up at times, and not a great way to help people learn either.
No, Shannon, thank you. I think that's a great comment about the gender and other diversity differences. And I think what Dr. Edmondson said in the video is so important. She said the leader has to go first, right? So in using your example, somebody should have been aware that, oh, Shannon's the only woman in this room. Are we sitting there talking about, guy stuff, if you will? And therefore creating an environment where she doesn't feel safe, doesn't feel part of the group in the work environment. And we do this all the time. Sometimes it's so, in the unconscious bias, we're not aware that we're doing it, but it's incumbent upon people in leadership roles in the broadest sense to be aware of them and to work to create an environment that's including everybody in the room, regardless of their gender, their race, their sexual orientation and identity, etc. So thank you. I think that was a very, very important point.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that our newer or younger workers are learning, and that when they are asking questions, it's an opportunity to help guide them or confirm for them that they're on the right path versus, making them feel silly for asking the question or demeaning, which can happen.
Tom Peters is another one of my favorite thought leaders. He said, one of the best ways you can work to include people is just regularly, with sincerity, say to them, what do you think? What do you think? What's on your mind, right? That is such a way to invite people in. All right. So speaking of thought leaders, here is Dr. Stephen Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, a game-changing book. It's on your book list. And Shannon, if you click this through, it's a very simple model. What we see is our paradigms, which impacts what we do, our behaviors, which in turn impacts what we get, our results. And at my age, I love any model that's 3 monosyllable words, see, do, get, because I can remember them. That was a joke. I can't hear anybody laughing, but that's okay. This is such a simple yet powerful diagram because we're all prejudiced. The word prejudice merely means that we all prejudge, and we do. We all prejudge based on our gender, our race, our ethnicity, our religion, our political views, etc. We all have our own set of lenses. That's the seed, that's the prejudice, the prejudging. That impacts what we do, which in turn has a great impact on results that we get. So let's use Shannon's example. If I'm a male sitting in that room and I look over and go, yeah, she doesn't have anything to add to this, she's a woman, what does she know, right? If that's my paradigm, my behavior is going to be, I'm going to exclude her, I'm not going to pull her in, I'm not going to, it's just going to be us boys over here. And the result is we're not going to get the result we could get because, and I mean this very sincerely, Shannon's a very talented, smart, experienced person. I'm leaving all of that behind because I'm not as a leader pulling that in. So the next time you're not getting the results you think you should be getting, instead of going back and working on your behavior, it's best to go back first and work on your paradigm. Is there a different way of looking at this, right? We're going to talk about the Google study that Dr. Edmondson referred to in a minute, but that's part of what they had to do is to go back and say, we need to look at this a little bit differently to get a better result. You know, of all the handouts, that's one I would take and like paste it up someplace as a reminder. Okay, so there's two key things that I want to cover here. They're definitions. So the first one, if I remember right, Shannon, is employee engagement. And we have a definition that you can fill in on page 4, but employee engagement is the, and we just keep the second leadership. So you can write this in, it's the mutual commitment between an organization and employee, and you can read the rest there. It's not about satisfaction. Satisfaction does not create psychological safety. Engagement creates psychological safety because engagement's a two-way street. Satisfaction's a one-way street. I, as an HR professional, for years made the mistake of going, let's do an employee satisfaction survey and see how satisfied our employees are. Well, you can make employees satisfied. Just give them more things. Give them more money, give them more goodies, have more Friday pizza parties. Back in the day, we do casual Fridays. Remember when that was a thing? You can satisfy people. But are they engaged? Are they leaning into their work? Are they helping the organization achieve its goals? And are you helping them get to where they want to be, not just in this job, but in their career and their lives, right? And when you make it a mutual commitment, that's where things spiral in an upward direction very, very strongly. My good friend Bob Calico, who Shannon's met, this is the definition he uses, and I think it's spot on. But there's another part of this, which is leadership. So I think John Maxwell's been studying leadership for 40 years. All you have to do is just get one of his books. He's written so many of them, and you'll get the gist of what he talks about. He keeps things very simple, which I appreciate. Leadership's influence, nothing more, nothing less, right? If you influence another person, you're a leader. Therefore, we're all leaders, right? We all influence other people. Some are just better at it than others. Some pay more attention to it or more intentional about it. So when we merge these two together and we have this intersection in the road, the intersection between employee engagement and leadership, that sweet spot right there, that is psychological safety. That if we worked to engage our employees and to lead with influence, with positive influence, that's where we can create very high levels of psychological safety. And it can be done, and it has been done. And Gallup, you're all familiar with the Gallup organization, right? Gallup's been studying organizations for years. We always think of Gallup as studying politics, but this number, the 70%, they found in a survey they did in 2019, 70% of the variance in team engagement is determined solely by the manager. This was so important, they wrote a whole book around it. And it's critical. Marcus Buckingham is famous for saying, people leave managers, not organizations. If you have a manager, or if you are a manager who is not creating a psychologically safe workplace, that's when people get on Indeed and start looking for another job. As opposed to creating an environment where people do feel safe to speak up, where people do feel safe to share ideas, where people do feel safe to bring their authentic selves to work every day, they're not going to go work someplace else because they get to be who they are right where they are. So the critically important statistic. So with that, Shannon.
our fun little exercise now. So this is where you get to interact a little bit with us and use your chat feature. I also have the Q&A section open, so if you can find that easier and you're using that, we'll look at both of those. Chat feature, everybody should be able to see what we're sharing. We want to hear from you. What are some traits or words that describe an ineffective leader? What comes to mind for you when you think about maybe you had a past leader in your life that was not very effective, and there's something that has always stuck with you about what they did that you did not appreciate? We want to collect some responses. Ross leads it off with dishonest. Tell instead of ask. What types of things? Oh, sorry, Zena. We have from Lisa, self-centered, or self-focused, closed-minded.
Yes, self-centered, it's about them, right?
Yep. Unapproachable, closed off, constantly change their rules, guidelines, agreements. Oh, yes, Faye. Lack of communication to the rest of the team, micromanaging, would criticize new employees instead of help with resources. They're defensive. I see holds grudges over in the Q&A. Unavailable.
Yeah, that's a big one, unavailable. They say they have an open door, but they don't, right? And they're unavailable always.
Yeah, we talk about that in mental health first aid, actually, of how to be better about that when somebody approaches you with their crisis, but you might not have the time to address it in the moment, and how to do that the right way so that we don't become that unapproachable person. You don't acknowledge other people's contributions, never wrong. They play favorites. Oh, I see Mari's on here. Hi, Mari.
Hi, Mari.
Not present.
Yeah, and Shiloh, that's a great comment, not present, because it doesn't just mean physically not being present, but it also means, to me, you might physically be there, but you're not there, right?
Yeah,
You're
out.
someplace else. You're on your gadget, or, right? So that's a great comment.
Yeah, and then we have Lisa added competes rather than works together. And that's, yes, all of these things, right? All of these things that make us feel like this is just somebody that I would rather work around, which can be difficult then in an office environment, especially when this is maybe your leader and you have to figure out ways to work around them or to approach them. Kim added, emphasize a team, and says you have to believe what the team believes. So there's maybe a hive mindset that this is the way that it's going to be done, and any other ideas are not, no, thank you. We don't want those. So let's do another one of those and add in flip side, what do effective leaders do? Or what have you experienced? Listen to understand, listen, the first four.
Wow.
And I love Kim, ask clarifying questions.
Mari, you're spot on. Caring about the person, not just at work. Yep.
Yes. Make sure that they care about that life outside, what's going on outside of work. And that's a big one we'll talk about more so in our second session. Approachable, seek out all perspectives, invite opportunity, another listener. Encourage failure in order to grow. Yes, that's a huge one, right? Well, we don't learn without failures.
And Lisa, that's such a great comment, because Dr. Edmondson talks a lot about that in the book, that how we treat failure is a huge marker in whether you have a psychologically safe workplace or not.
Yeah.
That's a critical point.
Available to answer questions. They don't hold themselves to a different standard. They understand the why. And I love that, because I say that all the time. Guides and supports their staff. Ask preferences, then remember the little things. That's a big one. Making them, especially when we talk about diversity and inclusion and making sure that somebody feels like they belong, when we ask those preferences and then just disregard them, we only did part of the work there, right? We did the surface work that makes it look like we're trying to be inclusive, but if we haven't actually done those things, then that person is never going to feel like they actually belong with us. Trust holds everyone to the same standards.
I'm curious about that, Faye. If you're able to add a little is relative. I think that's an interesting comment. I don't know if you want to add to that.
maybe referring to the little and the big.
Yeah,
The little things are relative.
because as I asked preferences, remember the little things, yeah, because
Yeah,
what's little to them is big to me. Oh, beautiful. I love that, right? So,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's, sometimes it's as simple as a smile, right? You just smile and acknowledge another human being. That might be just what that person needed in that moment. And then they're willing to share or to be themselves. Oftentimes we don't take the time to try to figure out what is big to somebody else.
Yeah, and remembering that this may seem small to me, right? Or maybe I would not react this way, but I have to put that aside and understand that this person's emotions are valid in this moment.
Yeah, totally.
So that it's obviously, I may not agree or completely understand, but what I can see is that you're upset. And that's what we have to deal with, right? So I think you'll find here in
Go
this
back a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me cue this up before we flash back.
All right, go for it.
So I've been doing a similar exercise like Shannon just took you through when I do leadership training or leadership workshops. I hate to call it training. And someone taught me this exercise years ago. And so when I go do it for a client, I take a picture of it and then type it up and send it to the clients. They have the list, but it's basically who's the best boss you've ever had. And I have people list out adjectives that describe the person they thought of, and then they discuss it. And by the way, this is something you can and should be doing back where you work. It's a great exercise because then you can kind of hone in on, so what do we want to look for in a leader at work? So now if we go to the next slide, what I've done is I've done this exercise about 80 times. I put them in a word cloud or a Wordle. And what jumps out right here again and again, people that are positive, people that listen. And I love what Lauren added. She wrote, listen to understand. Trust. We just saw trust a moment ago from Amy out here. Honest and consistent, right? What you just described in the chat, it's all there. But those are the ones that come up again and again and again. If you're positive, you listen, you're trusting and trustworthy, because trust is a two-way street. You're honest, right? To a fault, you're honest. And you're consistent. There's no guessing at who's this person going to be today. This is how we create psychologically safe workplaces. So I when I consult with organizations, I always tell them this, and it's hard, but I tell them this. Probably the most important decision any organization makes is putting somebody into a supervisory role. I believe that with my whole heart. That taking a lot of time to make sure you're putting the right person in that role is a critical thing that every organization does, and every organization messes this up. We've messed up at the Richards Group or other places where I've worked. We've rushed to put people in their jobs, or we put people in jobs because here's a great example. And my hospital clients, they readily admit this. They'll take someone who's the best at their job. They'll take the best staff nurse, and they'll make her or him the supervisor. What does wrapping a bandage have to do with supervising people? Nothing. Right. So let's go to the next slide.
That's such a key piece to that is, and I always ask, you onboard your new employees and you have an onboarding period and you have checklists and schedules for them to get onboarded and learn all the things they need to know. And what do you do to onboard your supervisors when you promote somebody? So when they go from that frontline role to now supervising people that they were just working next to, or perhaps in a different area, what are we doing to train them with leadership skills? And why are we making those choices about those people? Do they have the skills naturally that we're looking for?
Well, so Spiegelman and Barrett wrote this great book called Patience Comes Second. And it makes that point again and again. If we treat each other with civility, kindness, respect, dignity, then we'll treat our patients, our customers, our clients, fill in the blank there. It's been proven over and over again. And we do that when we take the time and attention to onboard those supervisors, as Shannon just said. So another great resource for you, particularly if you're in health. And earlier this year, there was, oh my goodness, this article in the New York Times. Look at the title of this. We right, so the date's on there, January 9th. mean, that was last year, so earlier last year. Boy, the time goes by so fast.
It's about just over a year ago.
Okay, we have to update that. We have to update that slide. But it doesn't take away from the title of this article. No more working for jerks. And one of the things that the article and the people who did the research in the article found was that a big part of the the great resignation and the quiet quitting and stuff, a lot of it has to do with people saying, I don't have to put up with this jerk anymore. I'm not going to put up with this jerk anymore. I have options, and I'm going to exercise those options. And I think the smarter employers are figuring this out. Somebody asked me recently, and actually, Shannon, I know you get asked the same question: why are you so busy? And I think the answer is because organizations are waking up to the fact that they haven't done enough to make sure that they're developing their people, not just their supervisors, but everyone. But it starts with having great frontline supervisors, managers, team leaders, whatever you want to call them. So if you're not a subscriber to the Times, drop us a note. We can get you a copy of the article. It's a terrific article. So Amy mentioned Google, and pages 6 through 8 of your handout has a 3-page summary of the Google study. Let me just briefly summarize what she referred to in the video. Google was really struggling a few years back. They had some teams that were like just knocking out of the park, and they had other teams that were really struggling to come together and to perform and to create new ideas. And Google's all on new ideas and ways. They spent 4 years studying something called Project Aristotle. And if this intrigues you, Google Project Aristotle, and there's a number of very good articles that are written about it. But they studied this deeply. They went and sat in on team meetings, and they watched how people interacted. They really wanted to figure out what the difference between great teams and poor teams were. And they found it point blank: psychological safety. They said teams where people felt comfortable and safe and secure, that's where things flourished. That's where rapid idea generation was happening. And that's where Gmail came out of, and Google Maps, and all these great ideas they've come up with. It's where people are free to do that. And they saw these other ones. If we just go to the next slide, they go and sit in on team meetings, and they watch, and they literally see people sitting on their hands, right, and not saying anything. They would watch people's lips, literally watch people's lips, about ready to say something, and then keep their mouth shut. It was visceral. They could see it happening. They studied how much time the leader spoke in meetings. In the poor meetings, it was 80 to 90%. It's back to what one of you said in the comments in the chat. It's always talking down, it's telling you what to do, not asking you how to do it, right? They cataloged all these things, and they came back to realize what an important role leaders have in creating a culture of psychological safety. However, what a big role they're having in creating environments that aren't psychological safe.
So, which brings us into a more negative word cloud that is not ours necessarily, but wanted to add this in here just as these are items that pop up all the time in these conversations that we're having with clients about, again, staffing issues. We are having people leaving jobs and getting rehired elsewhere. And a lot of, over the pandemic, has brought up mental health issues for people in the workplace specifically. And it's starting to affect us. So one of the things that we're actually looking at, even with OSHA, is mental health and stress reduction, because it is causing physical injuries in the workplace. And we have that data that shows us that at 3% of our workers are causing 22% of our work comp claims. And that those high-risk workers are 50% more likely to become significantly injured or worse. And it's a temporary thing. It's not, this is 6 to 12 months of somebody's life where they're dealing with some sort of stress or issue, or perhaps they are experiencing some mental health illnesses that are starting to present themselves too. It's a lot of different things that are going on. The pandemic didn't help anything. And so there's been quite a few studies that have come through over the last few years. This was a Qualtrics study that came out in 2021. And I'll read down the line here, that 42% of people at this time, and I'm sure this is absolutely still true, if not higher, were experiencing a decline in their mental health. 67% were experiencing increase in stress. 57% have increased anxiety. 54% are emotionally exhausted. 53% of people are sad. 50% are irritable. 28% are having trouble concentrating. 20% are taking longer to finish tasks. 15% are having trouble thinking, and 12% are challenged to juggle all of their responsibilities. So as like Mari had mentioned in the comments there, you have to also take into account these people's personal lives, right? And what might be going on in addition to the increased stress that we're facing at work with staff shortages, illnesses still coming through where we're not to be on site anymore. So maybe we're down another person, even though we're already short-staffed. There's increased work in some areas with that shortened staff. There's people who are still trying to mitigate the pandemic and the viruses, and there's upset customers. There's all sorts of things that are going to wrap up into, and it all depends on that one person and their personal journey and what brought them to that moment that they're standing in front of you today. And we have to do that job to take a deep breath and say, okay, there's a lot more going on here, and we need to have a bigger conversation and really understand what everybody is actually holding right now. I keep saying everybody that I know is at their capacity. They are.
Yeah, I look at that list, Shannon, and I always think that all of us are multiples on that list, right? It's not
Yeah.
just one thing. It's multiple things there.
Absolutely. And it's multiple things with home and with work. It's not just one thing. You're parenting, you have spouses, maybe you have parents you're taking care of. There's all sorts of things going on in our day-to-day. And we have to do a good job as leaders to make sure that we are, number one, honed in on our employees and kind of understand where those people are coming from and what their day-to-day might look like when they're not with us, right? Without violating any legalities or anything like that, but being that good, engaged supervisor to look at them as a human and not just an employee number is a huge piece to that. So some other studies that we have, occupational health and science found that our sleep is compromised when we feel stressed at work, that is a very apparent thing that you have started having sleep issues or experience insomnia because you are stressed and anxious and thinking about the next day at work and how are you going to handle these things. And people aren't able to just leave things at work. Flip side, people aren't just able to leave things at home. There's things that might be going on at home that, as much as we used to say, leave that baggage at the door, when you're at work, that doesn't happen anymore. And it really can't happen that way anymore. I was teaching a class recently, and there was some debate on this, on whether we need to support employees' mental health or not. And I said, the reality is, this is your job now. And this is a new safety hazard that even OSHA has taken a stance on, which means we have to address it as employers. And that psychological safety is your first step, is just making sure that this is even an environment where people can speak up. The University of Illinois found that when employees receive rude emails at work, they tend to experience negativity and spillover into their personal lives, particularly with their partners. So we can be creating maybe some domestic issues at home because the stress is carried off. And then, the people that are closest to you are usually the people that you feel the most comfortable to let go. And unfortunately, that can create some issues at home. And the last one is very sad to me. And if you know me at all, you know that I tear up very easily at most things, like snuggle commercials, whatever. And Carleton University found that when people experience incivility at work, they tend to feel less capable in their parenting. And why that? I'm a parent. I'm a single mom. I'm raising 2 girls, and I think that's absolutely true. That you hold all that stress all day, and then you get home and you don't have the capacity to handle the parenting stress that's coming, and you end up exploding on your kids or questioning what you're doing, not making the right decisions. Am I making the right decisions? Parent guilt is bad enough, but then when you're already stressed and having to do that, that's going to affect our next generation. That can't happen. And we can do something about that, at least for 8 hours of their day, right?
Yeah.
So Ross, now what?
Now what? Now what? By the way, does it ever feel like this? Right? Take all the statistics that Shannon just went through and everything we're going through. Yeah, this is sometimes the world we're living in, and it's gotten more complicated because Shannon was talking about leaving work at home or leaving home at work. Well, what happens when they're all in the same place? And it's all blended together, and it's just this mishmash. I think it's become more challenging. So we're going to wrap up in the next few minutes. I want to tell you a very difficult story, and because this is kind of like the extreme story of what can happen when you have a workplace where psychological safety really is non-existent. So this is Betsy Lehman, and Betsy Lehman was a wonderful human being. She was also a terrific writer for the Boston Globe. She was their lead writer for health and healthcare issues in their business pages. She was a spouse. She was the mother of 2 children. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. And at the age of 39, she was dealing with a severe form of breast cancer. Living in the Boston area, she went where I would go, which is Dana-Farber, one of the best oncology hospitals in the world. Unfortunately, the breast cancer didn't kill her. Dana-Farber did. And what happened was she was on in a clinical trial for a very aggressive new treatment for breast cancer, which ultimately turned out to be very successful. But during the course of the clinical trial, she was receiving 4 times the dose of chemotherapy than she should have, and it killed her. And Dana-Farber had to settle with her family for many, many millions of dollars. But when they did the post-mortem, they found that there were a number of people that knew that she was getting the wrong dose. But because there was such a psychologically unsafe environment at Dana-Farber at the time, in the 90s, people along the chain thought, well, I'm not going to say anything. I know that next person up will say something, and so on, and so on. Because the oncologist who was at the head of the trial was an ogre, was a narcissist, a huge ego. No one could speak truth to power in this case. That was the culture, very top down. And in this particular case, it caused someone to lose their life. So it's a terrible story. The good outcome of that is Dana-Farber has spent the last 27 years working on creating a much different culture and a much different environment. So this sort of thing will never, ever happen again.
Such a scary, scary thought to think that that could happen in a hospital.
Totally. So the airline industry, when I was growing up, I'm probably older than most on this call. When I was growing up, there were 2 things on the television every day, on the news. My parents were news junkies. One was the Vietnam War, and the other one was airplane crashes. And there seemed like there were airplane crashes all the time in the United States, because there were. If you look at the statistics, there were deadly plane crashes frequently. You don't see that on the news anymore because there aren't. They're very, very infrequent. And most plane crashes we hear about are small planes with inexperienced pilots and that sort of thing. And the reason why is the airlines got together and said, we've got to do better. And they created something called crew resource management, which is another way of saying we have to create a psychologically safe workplace. We have to create an environment where people speak to each other in real equal terms so that these bad things don't happen. Because what they found was the majority of these plane crashes weren't due to mechanical failure. There might have been a mechanical failure, but it was the human failure that caused actual deaths of people. Let's see if you remember something.
Make left traffic to run.
So that was just a teaser that you should go watch the movie Sully. But here we are in January of 2009. Hard to believe this is 14 years ago, where a bird strike hits a U.S. air flight that left LaGuardia, and Chelsea Sullenberger, having created being part of this very psychologically safe workplace, was able in a very short amount of time to land this airplane on the Hudson River. And if you remember, nobody died. There's all the people that got off the plane. The worst incident that day was one flight attendant had cut her leg. That's it, right? This wouldn't have happened in the previous era, but the airlines worked very hard that if we're gonna run into difficulty, who can predict a bird strike? We're gonna know what to do, how to treat each other, how to listen to each other, something that you put in the chat again and again, and it makes all the difference. So that's a positive ending, a positive story here. So again, please go watch that video clip. You can go right on YouTube and watch it. That's the one with Tom Hanks playing Sully Sullenberger. By the way, the movie recreates word for word what was said in that cockpit from the time that the birds hit until they landed the plane in the Hudson. It's well worth doing this. So Shannon and I can hang out for a few minutes for questions. I want to make sure we have the time to put this in here. Zena's put in a reminder for the registration link for March 2nd. In that second session, we're going to go through the 6 core leadership skills, people skills, really. They will help to move the needle on creating a psychologically safe workplace. And only 5 spots left for the mental health first aid training. Yeah, that's awesome. Those sell out rapidly.
Well, it's free thanks to the Richards group. It's so 5 spots left and we have a wait list. So go ahead and sign up. We have a short wait list in case there's cancellations. But Shannon is our trainer for that. And please go ahead and sign up. Any questions in chat or Q&A while we have our speakers with us? Thank you very much, Shannon and Ross, for this great presentation and workshop.
Oh, thank you all for doing this series. It's so important. So I'm happy that we could help and we made that connection.
Good to see you, Lauren, or see your name on those.
And I was going to ask you if you want to share your contact info in the follow-up email so that people can reach out to you if they need anything for their organizations as well.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So you will get a recording of this in the follow-up email, and you will get another link to the workbook and the contact info for our speakers as well.